front, any other thoughts on the panel or terpenes?
More for me at least is terpenes. You know, I think the smokable flower market is a huge thing. It's tricky with CBG, but with CBD, it's very much possible. The hardest thing really is just keeping that total THC down. So one thing that we've been doing is adding CBD isolate and rose and chamomile and lavender and some other herbs to bring that aggregated sample down below the lowest THC level. So that's one thing that I'm super excited about is the exotic flavors that can come out from it too.
I've actually been doing research on, I want to improve the performance of outdoor performance. So in chemovars or cultivars, as you would say, that have to perform within radius of somebody else who's growing outdoors, and say they're growing for fiber and you're growing for seed. You know, this is still a wind pollinated plant. So if we can attack the mechanisms for normal fertilization, you know, you have for a crop that performs well, you know, in spite of certain conditions. So
Like a triploid.
Wow. I mean, sterility is a big goal.
sterility, certain different types
Sterility
of
is coming, I
mechanisms.
think.
Well, yeah,
I mean, we already have.
oil, if you're growing for oil, for sure.
Yeah,
right?
but it's
You know,
definitely a goal.
Yeah,
but
and again, that I always like, whenever we talk about that though, it's like, part of hemp to me, if we're talking about it, is not just CBD, right? It's like, we gotta make sure we grow the other thing, but you know, I know in Oregon, well, no, you're from Colorado, not Oregon. Oh yeah, so well, you know how in Southern Oregon they lost a lot of great genetics because they just started planting alleged feminized seeds. You know, hemp farmers, even on the CBD side, are not inclined to look for males the way, you know, the traditional market is, and all of a sudden you just get, and cross-pollination is like up to 4 miles, I think, with depending on wind conditions, you know? So and it just shows how there is only one plant, right? They are definitely sisters, and, you know, I think what will be awesome is when we have this artificial definition of hemp removed and the oil varieties of the cannabis and or hemp plant are focused on. So if we look at designer genes in 2021, hopefully we get the legislation we need to just talk honestly about the plant and its different constituents. And so yeah, you should be able to grow an awesome plant. If it goes a little bit over 0.03, it's like, you know, that's what it needs to fully mature. You have hemp farmers cutting early to make sure that their product is right, but that takes away from the plant-based medicine, right? So if we start with the premise, you know, that I do at the marketing level, that CBD is a whole plant medicine, is a plant-based medicine, that means it has to go back to the farm, and we have to be able to work the medicine there. That means we have to be looking at ways of manipulating the different cannabinoid ratios, the different terpene profiles, and not letting pollen just chuck everywhere, right? It's not that kind of farming.
Well, I think you've hit on a good point there in terms of the priority people place on keeping their farm safe and not having cross-pollination happen. But there's also the aspect of just keeping a sort of a genetic vault, if you will, at other places that doesn't see the outdoors, that then can't become contaminated, and people are working on that. So I think there are ways to preserve the genetic information, not planting it out in the field necessarily and having that backup copy. So I know folks are working on that, but sterility, of course, will help a lot. As to that point, though, in terms of where we're going then, in terms of maybe has anyone on the panel thought about like maybe some of the marker assisted breeding work that's being done nationally and how that's going to be, Josh, you can speak to that, because I know there's a lot of work being done about helping the industry move forward a little more quickly, guided by some science to help keep that sort of genetic stock in place so we can draw from it and move forward more quickly towards really exciting cultivars.
I'm going to take what will be seen as a counter intuitive point. I don't think it really matters specifically which variety you grow. I think what matters is finding the variety that grows the best under your circumstances. So over the past 20 years, I've worked with plant breeders in 30 countries and brought 200 genera to market that didn't exist before. And so I've trialed plants in all of these countries in lots of ways. Plants perform differently in different locations. I'll give you a quick example. I had a good pheno of cherry wine that was grown here in San Diego in Ramona, East County, about 2,800 feet of elevation, beautiful soil, same varieties grown in Santa Clarita in a very similar environment, very similar soil analysis, very similar weather, very similar temperatures. The group in Santa Clarita took my advice to water stress the plants for the first 6 to 8 weeks, at every opportunity. So they did not water the plant until it was drooping. Then they watered it regularly through the reproductive cycle. They ended up with 22% CBD and 0.19 THC, delta 9. Same exact clone, grown in Ramona, 0.28 and 8% CBD. These are secondary metabolites. Secondary metabolites are stress responders. The cultivation matters far more than the genetics, and we are fixating, and forgive me for disparaging the bro culture, but the bros love, for instance, tissue culture. The fact that tissue culture is a tool is without question. But it is, I would say 90% of the cannabis tissue culture labs in the industry today are not just wrong, but they are lying to people, and they're creating a false sense of security. If you are not doing meristematic tissue culture, it is useless. Useless. It is only to protect the plant from the stupidity of the grower or the complexity of the environment. So the challenge, I think, for the future, marker-based breeding is the same thing. It's a useful tool, but it is more, in my opinion, a tool that CEOs are using to cheerlead investors, not actually moving the ball down the field. I call it, why do dogs lick themselves breeding?
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
there was a lot there to talk
Yeah,
about, and one thing I
exactly.
want to break down just in case just to kind of, so we don't pass it up, I think you touched on tissue culture. It's definitely a tool. It's used in a lot of industries for really great results. However, potentially it sounds like as a distribution mechanism for a plant you can already grow by seed easily and clone through propagation,
Yeah.
it's probably not the most economically viable method that makes sense, but people are very attracted to it, and I do agree with you, Josh.
We grow ornamental plants, which are, I mean, I've spent, like I said, 20 some years doing this. My margin per plant was between 1 and 4 cents a unit, and we produced about 25 million plants a year from tissue culture. My opinion on tissue culture is any plant that is not going to be in the young plant stage for at least 16 weeks should never be done from tissue culture. The established protocol is tissue culture is a tool for holding the plants in a clean environment. Once you have qPCR and RNA-seq testing with primers that actually work, ELISA testing is utterly useless. Once you have that, then our process is twice during the 2020 season, we will replace all of our mother plants. So just to make sure they're free of disease.
I actually want to back you because you mentioned a few scientific tests, so ELISA, qPCR, RNA-seq. These are things that we may not be familiar with, but maybe just could you maybe explain like just why those? So you're saying those tests are used to search for disease.
For diseases,
So
viruses, viroids. These are plant viruses are a fascinating category of critter. Coming from the ornamental side, we routinely screen for 27 viruses and 4 viroids. In cannabis, hops latent viroid, hops stunt viroid are the two biggies that we're seeing now. They're mechanically transmitted. My guys would tell me that based on testing, not anonymized data, but at least 50% of the THC cannabis in California is infected with those two viroids. And the only way to get rid of them is meristematic tissue culture. But the problem is people are reinfecting because they don't have good sanitary practice. And so I've been through this already in ornamentals. 25 years ago, we had tobacco mosaic virus and patient's necrotic spot virus and tomato spotted wilt virus just bankrupt whole swaths of the country because they lost all of their plants 2 weeks before Mother's Day. We had to create a clean stock system that allowed every grower to start with a virus-indexed plant every season, because the lifespan of a virus is not going to get into the plant and kill it in one cycle. You'll get to the end of the season with no problem. You might have, like with beet curly top, you might have a patch of infected material. Those did not get infected in the field. They came from infected clones. The viroids are transmissible through pollen, which means you're not immune from seed, which means that every seed breeding company has to have pathogen-indexed mother plants every year. We have to become religious about this because both of these viroids also infect citrus and Vitis vinifera. That would be grapes and wine, folks. If the California Department of Ag decides that this is a risk, cannabis of all kinds are dead in California, period. So we have to become more careful at how we do this. And the story, it's not that bros don't know anything, it's that so much of what they know is not true. Because I've done this for 20 years doesn't mean I can still do it. The buggy manufacturer said the same thing. At some point, things change. The velocity of plants moving, the number of people touching the plants, literally touching an infected plant and touching a clean plant will spread multiple viruses and viroids. Walking past and letting your clothes touch the plant will spread the viroids. We produced 500 million plants a year under elite stock systems where the margin was measured in tenths of a cent. This is eminently possible and eminently practical for our industry, but we all have to be singing from the same hymnal, because one guy, I know of a large company in California that has done a lot of work on cannabis tissue culture, and they have infected most of the industry with the viroids while testing for other stuff. So it really, I wish that I sound overwrought, but I've seen entire industries lose millions and millions of dollars from one virus outbreak in one location, one time.
Can I add to that? And that just kind of goes back to what I was saying this in another panel is, because you've been growing cannabis for 20 years, that doesn't make you a plant scientist.
Yes.
I'm sorry to say that this industry, we were brought out from the traditional market. We were brought out of the traditional market, because we had these types of growers. They were able to bring these plants and make them popular. But now we've had these companies and start investing in these guys, and now this bubble that you start is identifying like, hey, these guys really didn't know what they were doing. They've been following a recipe that was successful in that area,
scale, yes.
And now we tried to expand it, and now we've invested money in it, and now there's all these problems. They don't even know what a virus is, and it's like, well, because they never had to deal with it in their basement.
Once you've had to torch a greenhouse as I have.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a single virus, one tray of plants. 20 years ago, I had a garden center in Illinois. One tray of petunias came in. My ladies transplanted it. The protocol was a soft pinch at liner planting, a tip pinch. They had their knives. So they planted, unfortunately, the virus tray first. 8 weeks later, 2 weeks before Mother's Day, I walked into the greenhouse and every single hanging basket had big yellow splotches on it, necrotic spots. There was you cannot cure a plant of a virus on that plant. Mm-hmm. Only through tissue culture remediation, which takes at least a year, can you do that. I had to throw away my entire hanging basket crop. It one tray cost me $100,000 in lost sales. And also I didn't have the main thing people come to a garden center on Mother's Day to buy, 2 nice handled pots. It's a lesson I never forgot. And so we became so religious. I mean, our mother stock facility in Encinitas, we have 4 or 5 acres of mother stock, and we'll produce about 30 to 40 million young plants this year across about 10 varieties. Gloves are changed between plants. Tools are changed between plants. Because for the elite mother stock, it doesn't matter whether you are sterilizing tools every 5 plants, every 5 feet, every 5 minutes. What matters is that you do the same thing 100% of the time. And how often can we accomplish that? The problem is humans don't adhere to rules.
Yeah, I'd love to comment on that. So from my perspective, it sounds like we need to talk about scalability. So in the cannabis industry, we're all kind of just starting out. So sure, the ornamentals, we've been buying flowers for our moms forever, so that business had scaled and seen problems. And applying that, what we're doing in our company we're calling it professionalizing the brand, and it is bringing outside talent, some of which who have no cannabis experience, but they have traditional CPG or traditional manufacturing experience. We're building a GMP facility just for those protocols. So just to make clean food stuffs as we get into edibles. I mean, some edible companies, even that passed compliance testing through the BCC, don't have barely a food safe kitchen. Never mind a GMP kitchen or real SOPs. And you're right, on the cultivation side, I remember as an indoor grower, like suffering from things like Pythium and understanding that viruses can kill your plants, but never really embracing it. And as we scale even in where I'm from in Humboldt, it is a good message to have to, one, be proactive so the state doesn't do it. Right. That would suck. But I don't, just like I have scaled my business, I started my kitchen filling balm. Now I have like these automated fillers, and there's been all kinds of learning experience. We need to message to cultivators that, you might have been able to do 1 acre or 2 acres, but if you're going to scale to these levels, you probably should put some good manufacturing practices in place. And we don't really think of farming and good manufacturing practices the same all the time, and definitely in our nascent industry, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think people that are cultivators are hungry for knowledge. They have had to function in a very closed environment that you never knew who you could trust. You never knew what information was correct. I completely understand that, the challenges of that. I think that from my perspective, I tried to build out a company that will support what the industry needs, in my opinion, based on the clean stock industry. I came into horticulture at the time when viruses were exploding and bankrupting people left and right, and then I suddenly was in charge of the largest young plant company in the industry, who was introducing all the plants that were interesting. And so we had the opportunity. I was the tech support guy for 3,000 commercial growers for 7 years. This was before email, so I got a lot of blurry pictures in the mail from Walmart's. But it's so critical, just to your point, that we work to provide information and support to help raise people's knowledge base up, and also develop tools like receiving clean unrooted cuttings, so that whether you're a fancy schmancy nursery or not, you know that what you're getting is clean to start with. It's 3 weeks to get a root on it, and then you're out in the field and there's no problem. That is the kind of solution that I think will make everybody's business, just as it did in horticulture, rather than everybody holding their own stock and doing it themselves as they had for 100 years. In the late 90s, all of that changed, and everything became clean stock produced and unrooted cuttings brought in, and it worked for everybody.
And I think part of that you're really speaking to, Josh, that maybe folks in the audience might have questions on. We get to, what are the questions that the consumer, whether they're a farm that's doing the consumption as a small farm, whatever small farm means in cannabis, or large farm, whether you're doing your first 10 acres or you're doing your first 500 or 1,000 acre grow across the country, they still have a lot of questions regardless of the size of their farm. Like, what do you recommend people should be asking of their supplier? Because as we move towards these more advanced grows, people are going to be relying more on suppliers, especially as their own stock and their own staff experience problems of scale. They tend to look to the professional industry for it. So what are the questions that you think the consumer grower should be asking of their breeders, either their breeders for their own farm, or their nursery supplier, or their seed supplier? Maybe if each person could have one question down.
Matt should talk a little bit about. I think the biggest risk this year is inconsistent seed. Everybody's a seed breeder, and what they're producing is garbage. And I was talking to some people who had 700 acres up in Bakersfield, planted with 20-foot tall plants that were not feminized next to their feminized field. So I think, Matt's approach to seeds is going to be interesting for us to hear.
Honestly, and it's been mostly qualitative for us in that regard. The quantitative side is really starting to come into effect with tissue culture and, some of the things we're implementing now. But we've leaned on our 5 senses to tell us, what's going on with the plant more than anything. So, these new technologies like CRISPR and zinc fingers and things that are coming in, I think will really help speed up the industry. But the reality is, like you said, most guys are pollen checkers. Most guys are using qualitative analysis. So that does need to change and full transparency, that's something I'm learning a lot about too.
Well, what's a question that you'd like from when someone gives you a call and says, I want to buy your seed, what questions do you want them to ask? Like what should the people be asking of their breeders, of their seed providers, their plant providers? What questions should we be held accountable to? Should people be asking to kind of raise the bar on the industry?
I think one was what Josh said was microregions. We need to realize that these cultivars do well in a lot of environments, but they don't do the best that they can in every environment.
So field trial data, maybe.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm being picked up. Yeah. So just so basically field trial data. So seeing that maybe this cultivar did did really amazing in Georgia and it doesn't do as well in Oregon. You know, there could be a lot of reasons around that. So you think field trial data is a great
That's a
thing
big
for?
one. Yeah.
I have to say, in today's market too, it may be a tough pill to swallow too, but you need to ask what university this breeder went to. You know, at the end of the day, with these industries are built on things that, you know, if you just have had one goal in sight, you're not going to be aware of the full suite of things that can affect this, which is something that you kind of get in a university setting. You understand the whole system, not just yield or disease.
THC level.
Yeah.
One thing.
Yeah.
I'm
not
like
just
asking
one
about
thing.
staffing, how long they've been with the company, what their background is in agriculture. Have they worked for a large scale firm before?
Can
or
you
not?
talk
Can
to
you
their
talk to them?
customers and
Yeah.
see how they did? Give me a testimonial. I mean, I drove through Colorado this summer and I saw complete and utter disaster in the fields. Variability, seed lines that were supposed to be feminized that weren't males everywhere. In ornamental breeding, I do not know. I've run 3-4 seed breeding programs. I have never in my life even heard of F1 lines being produced with less than 10 years of background breeding. If you don't have an inbred parent line, you are not going to have consistent seedlings. Cannabis breeders use incorrect terminology. Clone, first of all, is not a thing.
Strain, stop it. Stop.
Strand, dear God.
Okay,
My
guys,
partners.
I know we
yeah.
should talk. We all have a lot of
The technology, but this true breeding is critical. If you're a farmer and you're buying 2,000 seeds for an acre of ground, you're going to see a certain amount of variation. But when you're planting 200 acres, it is, I call it the Amelia Earhart syndrome. She was just off a little tiny bit, but on scale, your life can be ruined.
You can really see
And
that
so that, again, my approach has been focusing on clonal propagation, vegetative propagation, because it's a surer, you at least know your starting point. You have a reference point. The problem is, again, let's talk about cherry wine. I believe it was bred in 2013 and 14. What is called cherry wine today often bears little to no resemblance to cherry wine that was introduced. It was a seed line. People took a plant. They saved seeds off of that. That is no longer cherry wine. It is a totally different plant. It is as different as you are from your parents and your children are from you.
And you're taught that the first week when you're in the university.
Yes, or I mean, my
I'm
God,
just saying, you know,
high
very
school
small
biology, and yet people are saying that these are the same things. So I have 8 phenos of T1. None of them are. There's some similarities, but then there's ones that are clearly not. And so this confusion leads the consumer of the plant, which is the farmer, lost. They don't know who to believe. They don't know what to think. They don't know what to ask. And so I think that asking about how this crop did last year, do you have an inbred parent line? What is the feminization rate? How many males will I see per 1,000? Do you have test results that can show that? Granted, you can buy a result, for crying out loud. So that, like, the whole COA thing is such a joke because there's no custody. But I think that the rigor of asking for a track record, and I mean, like, your company has a good reputation, you do good work, that's, I think, really critical. Because I know people that produced 20 million seeds and they're all garbage. I would not touch them with the 10. I saw the parents. The parents were all over the place. Yes, they were compliant, but
What does that mean?
I mean,
I want to, and I'll add to that, just ask a question. And if there are questions in the audience, we are in the last about 15 minutes. So if you want to shoot your hand up to enter into this debate and have a question or make a comment to post to the panel, please do so I can see your hand and call on you. But to comment that I've heard from some folks when I get calls, one of the things I hear is that they like the angle that, well, I actually want some variation in my field because this is also new, and they come from traditional farming, like folks that ask this question, and they say, I actually want to know that I have I of course don't necessarily want something that's so has so much variance, but I want some variance just in case of pests or weather or different environmental conditions on my 100 acres because I haven't grown hemp for the 20 years we've grown corn on it, I want to have a couple different phenotypes
Yeah.
present in my seed lot, and that's why I'd like to try seed this year. Does anyone have thoughts on, because some people sort of just really want clones because they like that idea of it being very standard and like more guaranteed is what I hear, and other people want that variation from a seed lot because they want to make sure they can at least, well, if 10% lodge, that's only 10% as opposed to 90% if it was clones maybe. So maybe if one person wants to kind of take that as a question from talking to consumers.
Just from a breeding perspective, I mean, you're right. I think a lot of people do like it because you'll see the dominant and recessive traits that genetic can express. So if we as breeders can go visit these fields and select those phenotypes, bring them back to our facility and propagate them and breed with them, theoretically you should start stabilizing and making that genetic better and show more of its dominant traits. So I agree with that for sure.
I would really like to meet this farmer who's asking that kind of question, because that's somebody who's really taken into account the age of this industry right now. We are not anywhere close to where corn is. Like we can't have stacked traits. We can't guarantee anything. But for the farmer who understands that and understands, hey, I can probably help this industry by having a space for some variance within my crop, even though it may have a small impact on my dollars and cents, but stop comparing apples to oranges. This is not indoor cultivation of a drug type. This is outdoor cultivation of something that has to perform with terroir effects.
Yes, and even within a single clonal selection. So for me, my use of the word clone is when we initiate a plant in tissue culture, we take 5 or 10 excisions. They go into the lab, whatever survives. So if out of 10, maybe 3 survive. That's cherry wine clone 1, cherry wine clone 2, cherry wine clone 3. We track those all the way to the young plant stage so that mutations, dirty little secret of tissue culture. All I've ever used bioreactors for the last 20 years and liquid culture is to induce mutation because it happens whether you want it to or not. So a single clone planted across a whole big acreage will have very different analysis levels of cannabinoid production and biomass production based on where it is, what the soil's like, whether it's a low spot which has more water, a high spot which has less water and more wind. I think we're going to find that most cannabinoid production is a response to insect pressure. I've seen an infection of hemp russet mites early on cause THC levels to spike. So the problem is it's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but I also have some farmers in South Carolina that have very effectively used some Bayox selections that are about 7% CBD and super low, almost hardly any THC, and they interplant with a higher one because the authorities in South Carolina let you select which you can homogenize the field. And so these guys' idea, it was really interesting. Their idea was it's an insurance. You've got some biomass that's going to be lower THC, and so if they're taking in proportion, if a quarter of the field is this one, they're going to take 25% of the flower off that. So I think that's a really smart approach. But the difference between that and what you talked about
that's a regulatory issue that you're speaking to, not a pest disease environment thing.
No, I mean, it's all of that applies, but it's an insurance against the whole field going hot, because I believe that we're going to come to a point where the farmer is not going to be responsible for the analysis. That should be resting with the manufacturer, just like all other crops. Mm-hmm. But the issue is, as a farmer, you want your known unknowns when you start. Yeah. I don't want to have a hemp crop that is Forrest Gump's box of chocolates. Mm-hmm. I want to know what I know, and I want to know what I don't know. And the problem is, with most seed on the market today, especially this next year, is going to be a bloodbath because so many people are going to get taken to the cleaners. And the problem is you don't know until the end of the season whether you won the lottery or you're going bankrupt. But I think a smarter approach is to have a known variation. You want to know from your breeder what the variation is. And every one of these shows where I start squeezing seed breeders to see how much, I'm sure you do this too, oh, so how long have you been doing this? Oh, 2 years. Oh, what do you have inbred parent lines? What's that?
Oh, your conversation over.
Yes, and it's, oh no, I keep asking. I like the train wrecks because I want to learn how people are thinking.
Well, I think, and one thing you just touched on, just for like the folks, and again, we're getting towards the end. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask them. I know there's a lot of good talk up here, but you should be able to ask questions as well.
I'd
Awesome.
just like to give a different perspective. So I've been involved in the medicinal herb world for 40 years. So I started out as a grower back in the late 70s, right? And we didn't know a diddly squat about anything. We had no resources like you have right now. So when you say you're a nation, not some industry, you know so much more than we did 40 years ago growing medicinal herbs. So you're really well ahead of that. One thing I am concerned about though is the whole regional growing aspect of crops around the world. And I'm finding it difficult to determine how that's going to play out because there's so much sharing of material right now, and it's not being kept in the same.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics just from a cannabis culture perspective. Similar, I'm sorry, I forget everybody's name. Josh. Similar to what Josh was saying, the wine industry has already modeled it out for us. Grapes grow in different regions. I think you were saying the same thing, right? The appellations that are written into the Mercer laws, for instance, for counties like where I'm at, Humboldt, are important because the things that grow in our microclimate, regardless of the strain, it is the environment. I mean, even as an indoor horticulturist, years ago, it's like environmental controls are king, right? The trichome glands and the oil response of the plant is clearly distressed, whether you're indoors using a dehumidifier or whether it's protecting itself from certain pests or whatnot. So we know in the olden days, before we had science, pressuring the plant inside with the environment. We know in Humboldt that the different microclimates that, a strain that works on this farm may not work on the literally other hillside. So I think that's where it's going to bake out in terms of variance. We may have, I love this, this is all new to me, by the way, I'm loving it, like a genetic seed bank or a tissue culture seed bank where everybody gets clean stuff, but just because you get cherry wine and I get cherry wine, my land might be attuned to growing it to its maximum potential, so I'll become known for that. So from a cannabis culture perspective, I think as a cannabis smoker, I think we'll appreciate not strains, but where they come from. Yes. This plant comes from Humboldt, and Humboldt flowers typically feel like this.
The appellation, it gives the power back to the farmer to create something that's special and interesting. I mean, we did a project I work with APA a lot on herbal products because I have a lot of people around the world that I can get plants from that are interesting for herbal medicine. The what?
APA, not APA.
They so often are struggling with authenticity and chain of custody. And we did a project for Boehringer Ingelheim. They wanted to grow the drug company. They wanted to grow Veratrum californicum, which is a native California plant that has some really interesting medicinal qualities. And they spent several $1 million building a production facility in Ingelheim, Germany, to be able to grow Veratrum. And they did crop after crop, and there was none of the secondary metabolite that they needed. That you could not produce it in an artificial environment. It really optimally is grown in California's native, thin, lean, decomposed granite soil, and that's the only way it produces the chemicals that you need for medicinal use. And so there's so much opportunity. What we can do, we have in our tissue culture lab in Germany, we have 3 to 5 clones of 3,800 unique varieties. And every year, those are flowered out to guarantee that they did not revert. And that is the core of about half of the Western world's ornamental plants. They all start in my colleague's German lab. This allows us to archive plants and protect them in a way that isn't available any other way. We're working on cryopreservation, the challenge being regeneration. Once you've frozen it, you can't always get it back. And the THC breeding over the last 30 years has bent the shape of the molecule so hard to one side because the bros all want a better high. My opinion is most of the next population of cannabis smokers don't want to be drooling on themselves all day after one hit. There's a real market for 2% CBD smokable flower, and that's what hemp is hitting on. The opportunity to go outside in your 2%, I mean, CBD, no, 2% THC.
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
sorry.
Yeah.
So, people who go out, one of my friends calls it the working man's joint, where you can go out over lunch take the edge off. It's my mother's version of a single beer, just takes the edge off. But you don't come back in like this. And there's so much opportunity there, and this is where I think the hemp market has so much potential. I work with so many small farmers that are so excited all over California, all over the Midwest and the Southeast, that are so excited to create an appellation. And that project that I was talking to Kevin Jodry about, to develop appellations, it's so fascinating, and I think there's so much opportunity for it. The challenge will be if the government decides to kill the industry, they can do it, and they can do it easily.
Look, so luckily in California, apart from CBD, we've had a thriving cannabis community. The good news about the CBD rise of it on the national side is even if we fell back to our traditional ways, because let's face it, the feds are never going to stop dispensaries in California. That ship has sailed. But to your point, we have gotten more professionalized. Even in our business, our wellness products have always had ratios. And as a wellness suite, we've often been confronted with, how do we do smokables? When we got into concentrate, one of our mandates was to find what we called the Holy Grail, a CBD concentrate, because people are like, why would you vape CBD? It's amazing, first of all. So if you haven't done a dab of CBD, please get out there, find a CBD rich. But yeah, it becomes like, I want to understand the flavors and the terpenes. We've been smoking as people for thousands of years. Smoking is amazing. It's an amazing experience. Tobacco has gotten kind of bland and watered down that we just get cigarettes. But here in California, we're able to get awesome flowers that have great terpene profiles. And it's not about the one-hit wonder anymore. It's about the terpene profile, the mixed cannabinoids, and having a great amount of CBD, like a 1-to-1 is really becoming one of our most popular sellers, not only on the tincture side, but on the capsule side. And now we're looking and working with farmers, not in the professional way that I now know how to up their game, to breed 1-on-1, 1-to-1 CBD, THC, especially for solventless concentrates, because I view a world where we're like, low temp vaporizing, awesome terpenes, where the CBD and the THC counterbalance it. So kind of like alcohol, you can have several sips. And like if you really need to get somewhere because you had a bad time with the wife, okay. But for most of us, we have a few sips, we talk, and then we call Uber and go home. You know what I mean?
As a social lubricant, it is useful. And I think, like even with pets, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. We did have a. Would you like to
Oh, sorry.
question, sir?
I've been wanting to say this to every panel so far, but in the natural products industry, we always talk about the aromatic compounds as essential oils. Why does this industry call them terpenes? That makes zero sense.
Well,
it goes against what the rest of the world.
It's true.
It's only one of the many terminology nightmares that makes me want to tear my head out.
It's same thing like for a solventless.
What does solventless mean?
Or like Holly Johnson always says, distillate. Isolate. She's like, it drives me nuts. She's like, you burn off all the essential oils upon extraction, and hardly anybody is cooking them off, saving them, and putting them back. And so when you buy a vape pen, I mean, this is what irks me. I didn't smoke at all until I was in my 30s. And so neither did I drink. And so I came late and was a little more of a nerd. My kids made fun of me that each week I'd buy a new variety and I'd make notes about what kind of high it gave me and how I felt. And they're like, yeah, I'm like, I was a nerd as a kid. My kids are like, used to be a nerd, Dad. But it's a very different experience. The real flower, when you get the whole sensation, and I always feel like an old man in trying to make this argument, but the experiential nature of wine is what made me love wine. I had a great job that gave me a fat expense account and sent me all over the world. And the world tended to be Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Austria, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So I got to drink a lot of really good, interesting alcohol made by people with a craft mentality. Cannabis is the same way, and I think the vaping industry is, everybody's running at it, but it's going to screw the farmers. Because in the end, who cares where it comes from? We got all these people here making cannabinoids from yeast. I think that won't pass muster through the Farm Bill because the Farm Bill specifies a phytocannabinoid, and yeast doesn't qualify.
Yeah, look, from the manufacturing perspective, it is true. Like, it's on us to build like that cultural heritage of our industry, like the wine folks. And I do take your point. Why don't we call essential oils or volatile organic compounds is probably the better term, especially on the vape side. One of the dangers we saw the vape fails with the tosopherol. That was people basically putting in food safe additives that, yeah, they're food safe, but they're not safe for inhalant. That's like, come on. I love vitamin E inside and on my body, but not vape, right? So that was a complete fail. And now even here, I love the word, the bro thing. It's such a, I totally know what you're talking about. And dear friends of mine,
Yes,
obviously.
mine too.
But when we re-terp distillate-based vapes and we're putting in high percentages of VOCs, nobody's even asking that, right? A normal plant might have 1 or 2%, of these volatile organic compounds, but now the big thing in our world is to have sauces and vape pens that have 8 and 10%, essential oils or VOCs. And if we call them VOCs, people will be like, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
Terpenes is an elegant term that makes you salivate. That's why we use it. And, again, because the industry's starting, I have to wrestle with my scientific integrity, my cannabis cultural integrity, and then my marketing. I'm not a marketer, luckily. I have a CMO, and I have to pay respect to marketers because, people buy a book by its cover. They're not going to open up your book unless the cover is attractive. So I can have the best product, the best education, the best information. I need to be able to articulate that to people, but I wrestle with the integrity of those three things, right?
Sales.
Yeah, sex sells, exactly. It's like, but safe sex does not sell, right? So if we're talking about I make quality products and I'm competing with somebody that's just telling you it tastes like cherry because I put all these cherry terpenes, and then I'm like, well, maybe you don't want to be vaping that. Perhaps you want to dial it back and not spoil your palate with, basically grape soda and try to get back to wine, right? Yeah. We don't even, as a culture, some of us are blessed to have had cannabis palates because whether like you, where we were just lucky to be in that environment over these last few years of prohibition, but most folks have no cannabis palate. They have no idea what cannabis tastes like, what the nuances can be, right? Like we're on the mission to make a strain-specific candy from some of these strains like papaya, where it's just rosin, corn syrup, and organic sugar, right? The rosin itself, just squeezed oil. First we keef it, then we squeeze it. Has an awesome, rich papaya flavor. It's sweet enough. Cannabis can taste like a candy. It can also taste like the garlic cookies, which is a popular strain this year. So there's all these nuances that we've not even begun to explore, and the public doesn't have a palate, especially on the national side. Marketers are like, oh, it's a cherry flavored gummy. This is the best tasting cannabis edible that you've ever had because it tastes like pineapple. I'm like, but it doesn't taste like cannabis. If I want real chocolate or a gummy, I'll go to Sugarfina. I want our industry to evolve to start to embrace the nuances of what cannabis can be, but that's a huge marketing lift because it's easy for marketers to we'll just go like this and do what everybody else does. Cherry flavor, quick dissolve, fast acting, all that shit. It's like, anyway.
Well, I think that was a really great way to kind of summarize what you would like to see in 2020 coming up on the product side. We're unfortunately out of time, but I'm sure we can take some questions after. But thank you guys for coming today and spending your lunch hour with us, and looking forward to more active discussions on this throughout the rest of the expo.
Yeah, I don't know that we talked a lot about breeding.
I know, we didn't talk a lot about breeding and genes, but I think
it's going to happen, and we're at the throw it at the wall and see what sticks stage of the industry. And that is, there's going to be a lot that doesn't stick, and there's going to be stuff that sticks that shouldn't. And so
that's the part I think we have to watch out for. I feel like, again, because we're a beginning industry and we don't have just like the wine industry, our culture and our honoring the farm, all our products, especially our concentrate products, you can trace back to the farm. It's very important to us because if we lose sight of the farm and just start growing for oil, or just worse yet, growing for single active pharmaceutical ingredients, we will quickly go down the road of having cannabis be not unlike our corn or our broccoli or our potatoes, where we show up at the supermarket or dispensary and get one kind if you're lucky.
Forget our counterculture.
Homogenization.
But also watch out for people that didn't drink or smoke until they were in their 30s.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone.